Yes, I agree with a lot of what everyone said. Me myself, I support a Medicare for all option because I have worked in medical billing and I've seen people struggling. People who have private insurance, people who are covered under, state health plans of Medicaid and Medicare. Um, there are people struggling on all levels, and the idea that if we leave it up to the insurance companies, they will regulate themselves and ensure that everybody has proper coverage. It's not true because I've seen people with all kinds of insurance, whether it is private through Blue Cross Blue Shield or United Healthcare or any of the other providers that there are, who are struggling in debt because for one reason or another their insurance decided the services that they had done were not covered. Maybe they weren't pre-authorized. Maybe it was a pre-existing condition, and this happens under Medicaid and Medicare as well. Healthcare is a human right, and I believe that's what we need to fight for. Because right now, especially, a lot of people are struggling due to COVID, as we saw with the president, contracting it. There's people who contracted it early in April and May who are now struggling with debt because of services they had to go do at their hospitals. If they had to go and now they have to pay for all these services. That's why we need to fight for them. And something that can't be underscored is mental health and ensuring that we have mental health resources for our working class communities. Because right now, as we've seen, there are thousands of people who are unemployed and people are struggling not only with their regular health but with their mental health, and we need to provide them the resources so that they can get through that. I think that's something that's really important and doesn't get touched on enough, and especially in lower class and our Black and Brown communities. As we've seen, COVID rates are higher, and there's still a large stigma on mental health within these communities, and it is part of our responsibility to ensure that these communities have access to mental health resources and also have access to adequate testing and to ensure that they're not seeing higher cases of death, which is unfortunately happening right now.
Thanks so much, Pablo. And
On that, because that's a big issue locally. People think that it's just something that's affecting people at the border. This is an issue that touches all parts of the country. Particularly here in our city, we have 23 different Latin nations represented. We have a large immigrant community, and we need to show people that we don't stand behind the tactics and the actions taken by ICE. I do support abolishing ICE because it's not a long government agency that's been around for a long time, and this idea that it's something that should be treasured and held, it is not true. We can get rid of it and we can implement something new, something that's not going to be responsible for the death of children, regardless of whether this is an agency that was implemented under Trump, which it wasn't. It's been around since before Trump. It's been around since before Obama. The fact of the matter is that children are dying right now. And unfortunately, the ICE has decided to take it amongst themselves. They're their own agents of law, and they do what they do, and there aren't repercussions to their actions. So I am for abolishing ICE and establishing something new to show people in our communities that they are safe and that they don't have to be afraid. And even those who are working to get their documentation, that's a difficult fight to have. It's not easy to become a citizen of this country. And there's people who have been fighting for years to try to become citizens. So this idea that people are here in the country because they don't want to be citizens is not the case, and they shouldn't be penalized by these organizations that just want to seek out anybody who may have messed up, who maybe doesn't have their documentation, and lock them up. It's something we need to fight to change, and I would support abolishing it.
thank you, Pablo.
We need to hold our police departments accountable. We need to implement, independent police review boards. Unfortunately, as she did mention, our Black and Brown communities are more heavily affected by these issues. And we need to, as we have future generations growing up, we need to implement the changes now so the things that were going on, 20 years ago, 10 years ago now don't continue to happen in the future. Unfortunately, as we've seen with the protests that have been happening, these are not isolated incidents. They happen all over the country. They even happen here locally in our state. And we saw how our police responded with tear gassing and attacking protesters, peaceful protesters who were out on the street. We need to hold these departments accountable. And, limit the power that we've given them now. Unfortunately, a lot of police agencies, they act the way they do because there's not enough repercussions for what happens. As we can see here locally, we have community members who have a community member who lost his eye, and you don't see accountability for that. You don't see anything happening to hold those police officers responsible for that. Other issues that are important right now, as far as criminal justice reform, a big issue right now on the table is legalizing marijuana, and something that comes along with that is, how are we going to help those who have been negatively impacted by marijuana convictions? That's something we definitely need to work on as a state, as those conversations begin to move forward of, legalizing and decriminalizing marijuana. Is helping all those communities that have been affected by generational trauma, these convictions that affect parents, they affect grandparents. And that's the reason we see people, they are limited into where they can grow as individuals and what jobs they can get and how they can move forward and grow their families, because of these convictions that, they damage generations. And these people deserve to, have these convictions expunged and to have resources provided to them so that they can grow as community members. With the discussion of decriminalizing marijuana, if that's not something that's being discussed along with that, then we're not doing what we should be doing for our community. So I think those are conversations that need to be had as we move forward as a state.
Thank you, Paul.
So something that's important when it comes to defunding the police is people understand that there are different budgets for different things, whether it's going to education or infrastructure. It's how those dollars are being allocated. I mean, locally, we see the amount of money that's being spent on things that we don't necessarily need. I mean, here locally, and this is a city issue, but we have our police department planning on spending, $250,000 on a massive vehicle that it looks like a gigantic Jeep, and this is a Jeep that it looks like it's something that would be more necessary in a war zone than it would in a city. You have $6 million, I believe it looks like, planned over the next 5 years on vehicles. Now there are things that are that the community might need, maybe replacements here and again. But it's how these dollars are being allocated and how the community, unfortunately, most of the time doesn't know how much money is going into these things, whether it's replacing SWAT gear, which is on the city budget for the police department. It's the way these dollars are being allocated when we aren't seeing infrastructure improvement in a lot of communities. My own district, which is part of New Haven, there are communities and neighborhoods that haven't seen infrastructure improvement in decades. And it's working as legislators to make sure the budget that we have, that we're allocating dollars in the right way, instead of spending them on all these expenditures that we don't necessarily need, that the community has no use for.
We'll take